We refer to Wolfgat as a Strandveld eatery, which references the fact that we collect indigenous edibles around the village. And if you were to literally translate Strandveld, it actually means beach and field. So that's quite indicative of the kind of food that we prepare. Paternoster is a historic fishing village with massive amounts of charm. It's layers of history, natural beauty, there's cultural diversity, and all of those things I think is what makes it a really unique destination. Wolfgat couldn't exist anywhere else. It's intrinsic to its environment, and we collect things that you can only find around these parts. The idea at Wolfgat was to not have any traditional kitchen hierarchy. We don't make any distinction between front of house and kitchen staff. And I have an amazing team. They're all born and raised in Paternoster. None of them have any formal food background, and they've just stepped up into these roles of chef and sommelier. And it's incredible to see the growth and the passion that they share with me.
Wolfgat for me is my home from home. Getting to work side by side with Kobus each day, him sharing his thoughts on foods and ideas on food, that's amazing.
I love it here. It's my workplace. Yeah, and we are family, so yeah, we are very blessed.
He tells us that he's not our boss, he's our colleague, not our boss.
We try and keep numbers down at Wolfgat so that we can serve the type of food that we serve. We can't go and collect what we do for 100 guests a day. So by keeping it down to about 20-24 seats per service, it's sustainable. We only prepare to the exact number of bookings. We have very limited wastage. And those are all ideas that in many restaurant situations isn't seen as practical. But I think some of the traditional restaurant ideas needs to be challenged. Salad of watermelon and ice plant, pickled watermelon rind, some celery shavings and pumpkin seeds. On the side we have a fresh tomato juice that we've infused with a bit of bokum and a hint of chili. If we're still around in 5 years' time, we'll still be cooking dune spinach and bokums, and there's no sense for me in over-processing anything like that, especially if you're going to give guests a taste of something they've never had before. You know, to have it in the same texture and the way it looks when you see it in the veld. That's what we want to share with our guests. Smoked mussel, in lightly smoked over wild sage branches, served with fresh grapefruit and pickled kelp. For me, the most exciting part of it is that the team that I work with are kind of considered in a category where they compete with people that are operating on an extremely professional level internationally, and they've become specialists and true professionals, which I'm really proud of. It's fantastic that we're on the African continent in a tiny little fishing village, and that we're able to get this really nice accolade.
There are about 15 million crickets in this room. Here, they'll live out their lives freely until they're transformed into food.
The purpose of the condos is to give the crickets somewhere to live, and so generally they are resting inside the condos. They'll come up, have a drink of water, have some food, and then go back down to rest again. It's difficult to perceive how many crickets are actually in a room like this because, of course, they were all living inside their happy little condos. We just take the condo, give it a bang, and all the crickets come out.
Most of these crickets will be milled into a powder that can be used like flour.
It's good, you can't even taste the cricket.
Or you can snack on them whole like chips. This one is barbecue flavored. Though you may be thinking this is a strange choice for food, crickets actually contain more protein than beef without any of the environmental damage.
A lot of manufacturers and entrepreneurs were looking for safer, more sustainable protein sources to add to their product, and for us it's been quite a boon to our business as a result.
We went inside Canada's Entimo farms to see how they turn crickets from bugs to brunch. For most of us, crickets are just the soundtrack of our summer nights. But Darren Golden and his brothers thought they could be used to create a new source of sustainable and nutritious food.
Just reimagining how we can feed a population of 9 or 10 billion people on an overcrowded planet.
Now they harvest about 50 million crickets a week, and they're aiming to triple production within the year.
The trickiest thing is that there's no real manual. In terms of this kind of scale and density, there's no manual. It's figure it out as you go. Nobody's ever done free-range cricket farming on this kind of a scale before.
It all starts here, where the crew covers boards with a mixture of damp soil and peat moss.
Making mud pies.
And the pregnant females flock to lay their eggs. It may look like just dirt and some grains of rice, but actually,
there's probably thousands and thousands of cricket eggs in there.
And in this room, about 15 million eggs. Of the 900 different species Darren could choose from, he chose the tropical house cricket because of its simple feed requirements.
It's a cricket that does well in high densities, grows really fast, and is a super delicious cricket.
Every single part of this cricket is edible. Plus, they have nutrients like fiber, iron, and calcium. After roughly 9 days, the eggs hatch and they'll hang in the nursery for about 2 weeks.
Crickets definitely require a nice warm environment. Being cold-blooded animals, their metabolism's controlled by temperature. So if you keep them on the warmer end of their preferred temperature, they grow faster. And then once they're big enough and ready to handle life in the big grow room, then we transfer them from the nursery into the grow room.
It only takes a crew of 5 to maintain this colony of millions. The crickets here eat a mixture of corn, soy, and some flax. On average, the crickets dine on almost 1,000 pounds of feed a day.
That's often staggering for people because you think of crickets as such tiny little animals, but of course when you got 10 or 15 million of them, they consume a fair amount of feed.
To put it in human terms, 15 million crickets is nearly twice the population of New York City. But growing all these crickets is still more sustainable than farming pigs, poultry, or cattle. To produce just 1 kilogram of cow meat takes a staggering 22,000 liters of water, and to produce that same amount of protein from a cricket, only a few hundred liters. Growing crickets also has other advantages.
So one of the interesting things about insects is that there's very, very few diseases that are transferable from insects to humans, which is very different from farming mammals or chickens. And crickets do not have any known viruses, or the species that we produce has no known viruses that can affect them. And of course, certainly no zoonotic viruses or viruses that can cross species.
The 3 Entomo barns can produce 9,000 pounds of protein a week, enough to fill the daily protein requirements of about 80,000 people.
By and large, most of our customers are either integrating it into a finished good, like a dog kibble, a dog treat, or selling it as cricket powder under a different brand, or putting it in something like a superfood smoothie mix, baking it into other baked goods and other snacks.
Even their poop is a usable product.
And as you can see, the floor is covered with cricket manure.
It's called frass, and it's a great fertilizer. The farm can produce about 6,000 pounds of manure per harvest. These crickets will live out their full lifespan before they're turned into food.
So from the time an egg hatches to harvest is about 6 weeks. The big difference is that at 6 weeks, a cricket is fully mature, it's lived out its life, it's bred and laid eggs for us, and essentially it would be dying within a few days anyway.
And now it's time to see them turned into food.
So this is our raw receiving room. All of the crickets come in from the farm.
The insects are rinsed, then sorted to make sure there's no debris from the farm in the mix. Next, they're evenly spread onto trays and slipped into ovens to roast.
So in order to make the powder, the moisture has to be below a certain percentage. We find that if it's above that percentage, it's really difficult to grind it.
While some are left whole and sent for seasoning and packaging, the majority will go into this industrial grinder until they look like coffee.
Do a quick 30-second blitz to break it up.
It's then manually packed into boxes of 25 pounds each. Every day they turn 15,000 crickets into 500 pounds of powder.
The secret sauce is really in the metrics. It's in exactly how your setup is done, your ratio of eggs, surface area of feed, and it's kind of like a big, giant recipe, and everything does have to be perfect for it to function the way that we function.
But there's still room for improvement. Right now the process at Entomo is mostly manual, and that needs to change if they want to ramp up production.
And so we're looking at more automated solutions, which will allow us to actually produce 3 to 4 times what we are capable of doing now.
Entimo Farms hopes this will also help bring costs down and make their products more affordable. Cricket flour sells for roughly $12 for every 4 ounces, which is 45 times the price of all-purpose flour. But it's not really the price that's holding back some customers.
Perception in North America around insect as food is certainly a challenge, and it's one that we are striving to rise up against.
In Asia, cricket's already a popular food, and Darren is confident the appetite for crickets is only going to grow.
Super exciting thing about insect farming is scale up is super fast. Each cricket lays 600 eggs or so, and so in a crisis event, if we needed to scale up our production, we can do it really, really fast.
This puree will eventually become vegan leather. It's made from thousands of mangoes that would otherwise be thrown away. Now, this waste can be used to make wallets, handbags, and shoes. But can it compete with the massive leather industry? We visited the headquarters of Fruit Leather in the Netherlands to find out. Fruit Leather collects around 1,500 mangoes each week from a Dutch importer.
The quality control requires that we cut the mangoes. We cannot sell them anymore. So I wanted to have an outlet for that instead of just throwing it away like trash.
It's a win-win as we receive the waste from them for free, and they don't have to pay anymore to get rid of their mango waste.
Back at their studio, co-founders Hugo and Koen start making the leather. First, a machine de-stones the mangoes, and then crushes the fruit into a pulp. The mixture pumps through a tube into a large vat. Next, Hugo mixes several additives that will turn the mango pulp into a leather-like material.
I'm checking if our measurements are right. My meter tells me that I have to add a little bit more of our additives. Perfecto.
When it looks right, Hugo pours the mixture onto metal baking trays and smooths it out to create an even thickness. Then, the trays go in a dehydrator overnight.
Before we dry it, it always has this light creme color. But after we dry it, it tends to look very different based on the type of mango that we use. So, for instance, a Palmer mango will give a more brownish material. Keith mango will give a more black material.
Finally, the sheets go to a leather finishing facility to be coated in a protective glaze. Rico and his family have been in the leather business since 1952, but this is the first time they've processed vegan leather.
We use the same process, but it's different material, so it responds differently to heat or to the finishing products we use.
First, he measures the thickness of each sheet. Then, they mix resins to make the coating.
And it makes a little film on top of the sheet so it will be protected from the elements.
A machine presses a thin layer of protective coating onto the leather.
When the sheets pass through, they go onto a conveyor, and that will roll into an oven.
The 100 degrees Celsius heat helps the coating dry. Then, the sheet hangs on racks to cool and dry completely. Each one undergoes this process multiple times to make it more durable. Next, another machine applies heat and pressure to combine the layers of coating. The final step is the design. This embossing machine can make the leather look and feel like animal skin. Then, the leather is sold to designers around the world. Hugo and Koen first came up with the idea for Fruit Leather back in 2015.
We wanted to turn something valueless into something that has value.
Eventually, with a lot of experimenting, we came up with the material that we have today.
A big part of this process was deciding which fruit to use.
When we first started, we didn't know that a certain fruit might lead to better material. Actually, in such a way that we even tried processing watermelons. Turns out there's not a lot of fibers inside watermelon.
They settled on mangoes because the fruit was easy to work with.
Later we found out how much mango Holland actually imports.
More than half of the mangoes in Europe are imported or traded by the Netherlands. And around 12% of food in the Netherlands is wasted.
We are able to get a very large amount of resource to make our material. That is why we decided to stick with the mango.
Hugo and Koen also want to reduce emissions another way.
We saw that all kind of chemicals were being used to tan the leather with all CO2 that comes from the tanning process.
The chemicals used to tan leather can be toxic to both humans and the environment. There's also the methane emissions that come from raising cattle.
If we reduce the number of cows, then we also reduce the amount of greenhouse gases.
Vegan leather also comes with its own challenges. Although some of it is made from mushrooms or pineapples, most is made from plastic. And this still leaves a large carbon footprint.
People started realizing that polyurethane leather, which is made from oil, is not the solution.
In 2020, the synthetic leather market was valued at over $30 billion. And one study predicts it will grow to over $40 billion in the next 6 years. But that's still only a fraction of the leather industry, which was valued at nearly $400 billion, 13 times more than its synthetic counterpart.
We do need these new alternative materials that have just a different environmental profile and hopefully a smaller carbon footprint.
But for small companies like Fruit Leather, it's hard to compete. Right now, Fruit Leather is only able to produce 80 square meters of leather per month. That's about 250 pairs of shoes. The final product costs around $22 per square foot. And the small size of each sheet means the company can only make certain products.
Eventually we want to work towards creating the material on a giant roll so that we can also increase our production capacity, but also expand the range of products that the material can be applied to.
The mango leather also doesn't last as long as traditional leather.
The upholstery of a car needs to last like 10 years. This is something it wouldn't be able to withstand now.
But they are still working to make the product more durable. And Hugo and Koen say their goal isn't to replace cow leather altogether.
This process has been completely thought out, and we started in 2015, so we are not gonna suddenly replace a product that has been around for thousands of years.
Still, they are aiming to make leather production easier on the environment, one mango at a time.
For thousands of years, the lands known today as Russia and Ukraine were inhabited by nomadic tribes and mysterious Bronze Age cultures. The only record they left were their graves. In the great open grasslands of the south, the steppe, they buried their chieftains beneath huge mounds called kurgans. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus called these people Scythians. Their lands were overrun by the same nomadic warriors who brought down the Roman Empire. The land was then settled by Slavs. They shared some language and culture, but were divided into many different tribes. Vikings from Scandinavia, known in the east as Varangians, rode up Russia's long rivers on daring raids and trading expeditions. According to legend, the East Slavs asked a Varangian chief named Rurik to be their prince and unite the tribes. He accepted and made his capital at Novgorod. His dynasty, the Rurikids, would rule Russia for 700 years. His people called themselves the Rus and gave their name to the land. Rurik's successor Oleg captured Kiev, making it the capital of a new state, Kievan Rus. A century later, seeking closer ties with the Byzantine Empire to the south, Vladimir the Great adopted their religion and converted to Orthodox Christianity. He is still venerated today as the man who brought Christianity to Ukraine and Russia. Yaroslav the Wise codified laws and conquered new lands. His reign marked the golden age of Kievan Rus. It was amongst the most sophisticated and powerful states in Europe. But after Yaroslav's death, his sons fought amongst themselves. Kievan Rus disintegrated into a patchwork of feuding princedoms, just as a deadly new threat emerged from the east. The Mongols under Genghis Khan had overrun much of Asia. Now they launched a great raid across the Caucasus Mountains and defeated the Kievan princes at the Battle of the Kalka River, but then withdrew. 14 years later, the Mongols returned. A gigantic army led by Batu Khan overran the land. Cities that resisted were burned, their people slaughtered. The city of Novgorod was spared because it submitted to the Mongols. Its prince, Alexander Nevsky, then saved the city again, defeating the Teutonic Knights at the Battle of the Ice, fought above a frozen lake. He remains one of Russia's most revered heroes. The Mongols ruled the land as conquerors. Their new empire was called the Golden Horde, ruled by a Khan from his new capital at Sarai. The Rus princes were his vassals. They were forced to pay tribute or suffer devastating reprisal raids. They called their oppressors Tatars. They lived under the Tatar yoke. Alexander Nevsky's son, Daniel, founded the Grand Principality of Moscow, which quickly grew in power. A rising power, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania defeated the Tatars at the Battle of Blue Waters and conquered Kiev. 18 years later, Dmitry Donskoy, Grand Prince of Moscow, also defeated the Tatars at the Great Battle of Kulikova Field. After years of infighting, the Golden Horde now began to disintegrate into rival khanates. Constantinople, capital and last outpost of the once great Byzantine Empire, fell to the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Some hailed Moscow as the Third Rome, the seat of Orthodox Christian faith. Now Rome and Constantinople had fallen. Meanwhile, the Grand Princes of Moscow continued to expand their power, annexing Novgorod and forging the first Russian state. At the Ugra River, Ivan III of Moscow faced down the Tatar army and forced it to retreat. Russia had finally cast off the Tatar yoke. Under Grand Prince Vasily III, Moscow continued to grow in size and power. His son, Ivan IV, was crowned the first Tsar of Russia. He would be remembered as Ivan the Terrible. Ivan conquered Tatar lands in Kazan and Astrakhan, but was defeated in the Livonian War by Sweden and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Ivan's modernizing reforms gave way to a reign of terror and mass executions fueled by his violent paranoia. Russia was still vulnerable. Raiders from the Crimean Khanate were able to burn Moscow itself. But the next year, Russian forces routed the Tatars at Molody, just south of the city. Cossacks now lived on the open steppe, a lawless region between three warring states. They were skilled horsemen who lived freely and were often recruited by Russia and Poland to fight as mercenaries. Cossack adventurer Yermak Timofeyevich led the Russian conquest of Siberia, defeating Tatars and subjugating indigenous tribes. In the north, Arkhangelsk was founded. In 1612, Russia was in a state of anarchy. They called it the Time of Troubles. The people were terrorized by war, famine, and plague. Up to a third of them perished. Foreign troops occupied Moscow, Smolensk, and Novgorod. But then, Russia fought back. Prince Pozharsky and a merchant, Kuzma Minin, led the Russian militia to Moscow and threw out the Polish garrison. Since 2005, this event has been commemorated every 4th of November as Russian National Unity Day. Tsar Alexei implemented a new legal code, the Sabornoye Uluzhenie. It turned all Russian peasants, 80% of the population, into serfs, effectively slaves, their status inherited by their children and with no freedom to travel or choose their master. It was a system that dominated Russian rural life for the next 200 years. The head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Nikon, imposed religious reforms that split the church between reformers and old believers. It's a schism that continues to this day. At age 17, Peter I seized power from his half-sister Sophia. Peter became the first Russian ruler to travel abroad. He toured Europe with his Grand Embassy, seeking allies for Russia's war against Turkey and learning the latest developments in science and shipbuilding. Peter made many reforms, seeking to turn Russia into a modern European state. He demanded Russian nobles dress and behave like Europeans. He made those who refused to shave pay a beard tax. Peter built the first Russian navy, reformed the army and government, and promoted industry, trade, and education. In the Great Northern War, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and Denmark took on the dominant power in the Baltic, Sweden, crushing Charles XII's army at the Battle of Poltava. On the Baltic coast, Peter completed construction of a new capital, St. Petersburg. The building of what would become Russia's second largest city among coastal marshes was a remarkable achievement, though it cost the lives of many thousands of serfs. The Great Northern War ended with the Treaty of Neustadt. Russia's gains at Sweden's expense made it the new dominant Baltic power. 4 years before his death, Peter was declared Peter the Great, father of his country, emperor of all the Russias. Peter was succeeded by his wife Catherine, then his grandson Peter II, who died of smallpox, aged just 14. His wife Catherine became Empress of Russia. Her reign would be remembered as one of Russia's most glorious. In the early 1700s, Peter the Great's reforms put Russia on the path to becoming a great European power. But it was his grandson's German wife, Catherine, who deposed her husband to become Empress of Russia, who oversaw the completion of that transformation. Like Peter, she too would be remembered as the Great. Catherine was a student and admirer of the French Enlightenment, and even corresponded with the French philosopher Voltaire. She reigned as an enlightened autocrat. Her power was unchecked, but she pursued ideals of reason, tolerance, and progress. Catherine became a great patron of the arts and learning. Schools and colleges were built. The Bolshoi Theatre was founded, as well as the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts, while her own magnificent collection of artwork now forms the basis of the world-famous Hermitage Museum. Catherine encouraged Europeans to move to Russia to share their expertise. Catherine's reign also saw enormous territorial expansion.
She is a genius.
She really is.
I turned on the lights, the TV, and the radio. Still, I can't escape the ghost of you. What has happened to it all? Crazy, some will say. Where is the life that I recognize? It's going, but I won't.
Jean. Though I never knew you at all, you had the grace to hold yourself while those around you crawled. They crawled out of the woodwork and they whispered into your brain. They set you on the treadmill and they made you change your name.